Philip F. Deaver is a short story writer, mostly. His work appears in the literary magazines. He has won a number of awards: the Flannery O'Connor Award, a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, a Breadloaf Writers Conference Fellowship, and once, in the Christmas lottery at the consulting firm he worked in, he won a plant. It was a large plant, maybe 6 feet tall. That was back when he thought anything was possible. His work has appeared in the Missouri Review, the Kenyon Review, the New England Review, and the Florida Review, among many others. And also, his short stories have been anthologized in Best American Catholic Short Stories, O. Henry Prize Short Stories, Lee Gutkind's Baseball Nonfiction Anthology, Anatomy of Baseball, and John McNally's great anthology of baseball fiction, Bottom of the Ninth. This short fiction has been recognized in Best American Short Stories and the Pushcart Prize. He teaches creative writing at Rollins College. Please welcome Philip F. Deaver.
No, it needs to be up a little bit. Could you? That's great, thanks. I was going to talk about poetry and storytelling, but Monica's poems pretty much handle that. You can hear the stories. So I'm just going to read two things out of the poetry book before I do a short story. You never think Garrison Keillor will read one of your poems. And I have no idea how he ever got this book. But once he had it, he began periodically, almost like a Chinese drip, drip, drip kind of torture. He would read one every once in a while when you wouldn't expect it, and they'd be a year apart. And one time he even read it on my birthday. He doesn't know what my birthday is. And I really like it that he does that. So I called my little town of Tuscola, I called the newspaper, and I had it put in the paper that Garrison Keillor was going to read poems, and there were letters to the editor, who's Garrison Keillor. So that's where I grew up. So this is the first story, the first poem that he actually read he's read 3 poems of mine, one of them twice. So here was the first one. And it's very odd to me because it's the oldest poem in this book. It was written clear back in 1971 when I was working in an employment agency. And in the employment agency, they gave you fake names. Mine was Rex Page. I know you were wondering. So there was nothing to do, and I never got anybody a job, and finally I got fired. But I did write a great poem from it, and apparently Garrison Keillor liked it too, and it's entitled The Worrier's Guild, like a person who worries, the Worrier's Guild. Today there's a meeting of the Worrier's Guild, and I'll be there. The problems of Earth are to be discussed at length, end to end, for 5 days, end to end, with 1,100 countries represented, all with an equal voice, some wearing turbans and smocks, and all the men will speak, and the women with or without notes, in 38 languages and 9 different species of logic. Outside in the autumn, the squirrels will be chattering and scampering directionless throughout the town because they aren't organized yet. The last one that he read was more of a story, and he read 3 in a cluster, and then just a year or so ago he read this one, and I just never knew which one he would pick, and this one I probably would have preferred he didn't, and I live to regret that he did. So I'll tell you about it. Gray. This was our pretty gray kitten, hence her name, who was born in our garage and stayed nearby for her whole life. There were allergies, so she was, as they say, an outside cat. But she loved us. For years, she was at our window, sometimes a paw on the screen as if to want in, as if to be with us the best she could. She would be on the deck at the sliding door. She would be on the small sill of the window in the bathroom. She would be at the kitchen window above the sink. We'd go in the living room anticipating that she'd be there to hop up, look in. She'd be on the roof. She'd be in a nearby tree. She'd be listening through the wall to our family life. She knew where we were, and she knew where we were going, and would be there to meet us. Little spark of consciousness, calm kitty eyes staring through the window. After the family broke, and when the house was about to sell, I walked around it for a last look. Under the eaves, on the ground, there was a path worn in the dirt, tight against the foundation. Small padded feet, year after year, window to window. When we moved, we left her to be fed by the people next door. Months after we were gone, they found her in the bushes and buried her by the fence. So many years after, I can't get her out of my mind. It's sort of a story. So, oh, by the way, I just want to say, you know who you are, all of you really, but thank you all for coming. Jane Staley, thank you for coming. Leslie, thanks for being here. Jeff and Gianna, our link, this writing community's link to Tampa, thanks for being here. Okay, so the title of the story is Nose. It's a story that's never been published. It has a kind of headline type titles. Let's see if I can show you. So right here, you can see in bold, I've cut it because it's 27 pages long. So I've cut it, and but each one of the little sections has a kind of bold title. So I'll read you some of those bold titles as we go along, and you'll get the general drift of the story, even though I won't be able to read the whole thing. I worked as a human resources consultant in the 1980s and 90s before Leslie rescued me, and I ended up at Rollins College. I'm one of the luckiest people there is. There's a little epigraph right at the top of this. It goes, Ward does well in business, and thus he and his wife, Madeline, have the means to problem solve when their son, Jason, begins to show signs of trouble in school. Nose. Ward sat in his office waiting for the call his wife had warned him to expect, and trying to think of the term people used to use back when he was little that meant a person had what they call now low self-esteem. It was right on the tip of his tongue. He'd think of it in a minute. The receptionist rang, a call from the middle school on line 2. Hello? Mr. Booker, this is Elaine at the middle school. Hi, Elaine, what's up? He tried to sound pleasant, authoritative, successful, matter-of-fact, and busy. Did your wife tell you about this? She was in her stern mood. She called from time to time to discuss his son's progress in school. Yeah, well, sort of, she said. Well, the dentist says the tooth can't be reimplanted. We had it in milk and everything, but for one reason or another, is Jason still at school? No, the school officer gave him a ride home. It's a 2-week suspension this time, and the timing isn't good with finals coming. And was he upset? Jason, he's never upset. Always somebody else's fault. Yeah, better than half the time he's right about that, in my experience. Listen, I know a really good dentist. Maybe you need a second opinion on the tooth, you think? Is it still in milk or did they toss in the towel? Madeline had her... Mr. Parmenter isn't in a very good mood, and I think we'll just leave it like this. Clearly, it's your decision whether Mr. Parmenter will live his life without his front tooth. What are counselors for, right? I admire you taking this on yourself. Can you tell me what happened? Don't be smart, okay? I'm in a mood here. Your son, Mr. Booker, simply tripped the teacher, is how they told me. And he went headfirst into the bike rack, number 2, back by the science room, side door, and he broke his front tooth off. He has a big goose egg on his forehead, too, I noticed. Nobody's even mentioned that and the excitement about the tooth. So soccer was it that they were playing? I guess, I don't know. The details weren't important to Elaine. Ward could tell that. Jason's fault, case closed. He could hear the school office in the background, buzzer, intercom, kids' voices, and adults mixed. Well, why did they play so close to the bike rack? Why was the PE teacher playing instead of supervising? And how does a sixth grader with stunted growth from Ritalin knock down a grown man? I don't know, but he's going to get a lawyer. Oh, come on. Ward got up and stretched the phone cord as he closed his office door. He's mad. He and Jason haven't been friends the whole year. You remember when Jason got detention because he talked in softball? Elaine, I've been sitting here trying to think of something. That term we used to use it in a place of what they call now low self-esteem. We used to say a kid has blah, blah, you know what I'm talking about? Is this a change of subject? Right. Well, I don't know, but Mr. Parmenter, I'll think of it in a minute. Look, you just tell Mr. Parmenter to call me, and I'm sure we can work something out without lawyers. Tell him to keep the tooth and milk and call me. Tell him to call me immediately. It's in his interest. Tell him I'm a reasonable person and I won't press charges. That's a joke, Elaine. Don't tell him that. Tell him to forget the lawyer thing and call me like a civilized person. Will you do that? Lawyers cost a lot, and I can afford a better one than he can. Don't tell him that. You know what to say. Just have him call me. He heard Elaine sigh. Such a cute sigh it was. And thanks for the time and information. Sorry something happened again. He hung up. Whatever it was, he'd think of it in a minute. Whatever it was, Ward had it when he was a kid, and like genetic clockwork, Ward's son, Jason, was exhibiting the symptoms right here on the front edge of his own adolescence. Jason wasn't a happy boy. That was all there was to it. It's what caused him to always act out. He wasn't a bad kid, not at all. Not mean, not sneaky like his friends. It was disappointing to Ward that Jason was turning out like this because Ward had the resources to give the boy anything he wanted, and in fact, he thought he had. Whatever it was, he was almost sure it started with an E. And it was right on the tip of his tongue. Here's a heading. One of the headings that we go right to next is like Jason gets his nose fixed by a plastic surgeon after getting whammed by a foul ball. And then Jason goes to the tutoring center to improve his study skills. And then Ward adopts a business philosophy toward Jason. And then there's Jason goes to a shrink for various reasons. And then, I think I'll read that one. Jason goes to a shrink for various reasons. Sometime in there, Ward got the idea to send Jason to a psychologist, one Abraham Marco, who coincidentally lived in the neighborhood. And he learned that it was possible for Jason to go over to the house instead of downtown to the office. It wouldn't cost much more for this convenience, and although not a specialist in the problems of children, the psychologist was certified, and he was supposed to be one of the best family therapists in the city. This should work out great, he told Madeline, kiddingly one night when the subject came up. Family therapy's probably right, next. But when he looked up, he realized that Madeline wasn't home. So then here's Jason goes to camp to broaden his experience and make new friends. And then here's Jason goes to another camp, but that doesn't work out either. So he goes to military school. And then there's Jason gets his eye movement analyzed by a specialist, and of course, braces. And then there's, how about Disney? And finally, there's Jason goes to a nose specialist to learn how to cool his hypothalamus. On his desk, Ward found an article in the Wall Street Journal which suddenly appeared to be the key, the absolute key. The author, a medical consultant and expert in the Boston area, was commenting on nose breathing as the way to happiness. When he spotted the article, Ward was stunned with the sudden realization that this might be exactly what's wrong. According to the article, breathing through the nose is the only way the brain, and particularly the hypothalamus, is cooled, which of course it needs to be. You can't be expected in this day and age to go through adolescence with a hot hypothalamus and figure everything else is just going to pan out. It occurred to Ward that because of his allergies and his T-ball whammed septum, his son always mouth-breathed. Who would have thought it? All of this terror and these problems were because of an isolated incident years ago driving wonderful blonde Jason not to cool his hypothalamus enough by nose breathing. The article was proof positive. They had tested students from here to yonder, tricking them this way and that to get them to mouth breathe or nose breathe, and then felt their heads to see if their temperature felt different, and then real quick, they found out if the person was happy or not. They had ways of finding out if a person was truly happy. Science is an amazing thing. The mouth breathers weren't happy, and the nose breathers were. That's simple. He looked up the guy in the Boston phone book, called up there, and booked a couple of flights for the next day. Madeline was real skeptical. Ward, come on, don't lose it now. Can it hurt to try? Boston is very in. God, I need Valium, she said. I was kidding. Oh, right, look. This is ludicrous, Ward, come on. You're going off to Boston like this guy was Lourdes or someplace. It was this simple. The Greeks, if it was this simple, the Greeks would have discovered it. Or at least one of the boys out on 434 would have, and hung out a shingle. Madeline, I'll handle this. You sit on your large butt and I'll handle it. Well, imagine the heartbreak if it turns out that this is the problem, because Jason doesn't have an easily breathe-throughable nose and never will. What then? Well, we'll get an allergist. We'll get more plastic surgery. Madeline, it's a testimony to my love for Jason and my desperation. Elaine says it can't go on like this forever. Listen, he won't survive forever. He'll be lucky to survive PE. Boston was lovely. Ward's boy was proud to have ridden on the plane with Ward. Usually Ward didn't go with him when he was sending him someplace to get fixed or contained. On the plane, while they talked, Ward checked to see if the boy was doing a lot of mouth breathing, and sure enough, over half the time, mouth. He made a mental note to pass this observation along to the doctor. The doctor's office, unlike anything else in Boston, was convenient to the airport. A little woman sitting low in a window with a sliding glass checked him in, and they had only a small wait. Soon, a nurse called Jason in through a big door, and off he went. It wrenched Ward's heart to see how willingly the lad did everything they asked him to do. How willing he was to acknowledge his problems, and how he went along with Ward on all his dumb ideas. Well, at last, an answer. Ward could hear them, he thought, through the wall. They were in the back room there for a while, soft talking. It made Ward feel good to see another adult effectively relating to his son, and to see his son receive it so well. That was a problem. Adults always seemed to jump down Jason's throat about things, and there was bound to be some benefit in just having him treated nice. Ward sat reading the magazine, taking solace in low tones coming from the next room. God, this was a great idea. And then the doctor came out to meet him. Amazingly, he was not quite 5 feet tall. Hello, Mr. Booker. Hi. We have Jason now in a cooling facility. It's quite comfortable, and he'll be there for perhaps 5 or 6 minutes. He seems like a nice boy. Yes. I wanted to be sure to talk with you and to ensure that you know this is an experimental procedure. I'm a psychiatrist by training, and thus an MD. Our interventions are not chemical, nor are they invasive, but are psychologically what we call topical. We consider you a partner in our research, and this means a savings for you. Oh, good. But you know, when it comes to the welfare of my son, cost just $1,000 for today plus $900 for each 2 additional visits is what this will run you. It includes both cooling and warming, clinical observation, and counseling inside the bounds of our hourly limit. We are, by the way, conscious of our environmental responsibilities, and fluorocarbons are not used in our process. Well, that's very good. You're welcome to tour our facility during tour time, which is tomorrow, 9 to 11. Thanks, but I'm from out of town. Tour time, of course, is on us. In your case, a $15 value. Thank you. I should get back to Jason now, but I wanted to talk with you and meet you. We treat the whole person here, and sometimes that means the whole family, if you get my meaning. Right then, Jason peeked out the big door. Dad, look how short he is. The doctor turned red, smiled forcibly, and ushered Jason back into the cooling room, saying, "We'll be out shortly." This was pretty nice, Ward thought to himself, him coming out, making personal contact with the patient's father. Great. Suddenly, though, through the wall, Ward heard the doctor yelling, "Now listen to me, you little shit. Breathe through your nose." The doctor's nurse peeked over the counter through the little window she lived in. "Don't mind his language," she whispered. "The doctor has a problem, you might say, about his height. I knew we were in trouble when your son said that. The doctor's lately been counseled to express his anger, to let out his inner child, which has for many years been repressed down deep inside himself. He has an inferiority complex in layman's terms." She smiled and whispered, "He's very short, but brilliant." Inferiority complex. That was it. Thank you.